Throughout history, women have made leaps and bounds in terms of rights and responsibilities. One of the main activists contributing to this continual improvement is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. A women's rights activist, mother, and wife, Stanton was a revolutionary figure responsible for giving women the right to vote, increasing income equality in the workforce, and making it more socially acceptable for women to hold positions of power. Our society would not be where it is today without the work of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was born on November 12, 1815, in Johnstown, New York. She was one of 6 surviving children and born to Daniel and Margaret Livingston Cady. Elizabeth's father, Daniel, was a very prominent lawyer, and her mother came from a wealthy and well-respected family. The Cadys were some of the most sophisticated and high-class people in the area. Elizabeth was one of the few girls to receive an education and graduated from Troy Female Seminary in 1833. She had a good and plentiful upbringing, however her father had wished he had had a son instead. Elizabeth's interest in women's rights began by the influence of her cousin, Gerrit Smith, in 1832 after her graduation from school, when both of them were in their 30s. They soon became friends and formed the Women's New York State Temperance Society, electing Elizabeth as their president in 1852. In 1854, the two began their campaign with Elizabeth giving her address to the state legislature of New York. In the 1850s, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony go through a decade-long phase of writing and presenting papers to the New York legislature regarding women's rights, equality, opportunity in the workforce, and voting. Stanton serving as the leading voice and philosopher, while Susan B. Anthony served as the powerhouse. Anthony and Stanton were able to pass the Married Women's Property Act in 1860, which stated that women were able to possess and earn money during marriage. 7 years later, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony began publishing Revolution, a newspaper entitling Women's Rights and Suffrage. October of the same month, the two take up a huge tour across the country funded by George Francis Train. They tour from Lawrence, Kansas to Leavenworth, Kansas, making countless stops on the way. In 1871, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony formed the National Women's Suffrage Association. In one of her speeches, The Solitude of Self, Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, "To throw obstacles in the way of a complete education is like putting out the eyes. To deny the rights of property is like cutting off the hands. To refuse political equality is to rob the ostracized of all self-respect, of credit in the marketplace, of recompense in the world of work, of a voice in choosing those who make and administer the law, a choice in the jury before whom they are tried, and in the judge who decides their punishment. Think of woman's position, robbed of her natural rights, handicapped by the law and custom at every turn, yet compelled to fight her own battles, and in the emergencies of life to fall back on herself for protection." Elizabeth and Susan continued campaigning and touring the country in their later years of collaboration, gaining more support as time went on. They also co-authored The History of Women's Rights, later established in 2 volumes. In Stanton's final years, she wrote the Women's Bible, and her viewpoints toward inherently sexist Christianity and culture grew. By 1895, Elizabeth grew unable to give her speeches directly due to advancing medical conditions that made it hard for her to travel. The works that she published from her home would make it easier for her to challenge common beliefs like Christianity. On October 26, 1902, Elizabeth Cady Stanton died of heart failure. She would be unable to see women gain the right to vote nearly 18 years later. She inspired millions to take a stand against common beliefs, and with it, changed the way that the world thought of women. Elizabeth Cady Stanton proved herself to be a revolutionary leader of the feminist movement who impacted women's rights and created a legacy by helping women vote, increasing income equality in the workforce, and making it more socially acceptable for women to hold positions of power. On August 28, 1920, women in the United States received the right to vote via the ratification of the 19th Amendment. In 1961, John F. Kennedy initiated the President's Commission to study the status of women in America. This study reported countless accounts of discrimination in the workforce. As a result, Kennedy suggested more benefits for women, such as equal pay and maternity leave. Although this opened the eyes of the American people, there was still inequality. June 10th of 1963 was the day that the Equal Pay Act was passed. It stated that employers could not pay a woman less than a man for equivalent work. This was an important step because it stated that the work put forth by anyone, man or woman, was equal. It proved that the government was trying to shrink the gender gap. Stanton's effort had gotten the attention of the government, and her voice spoke for thousands that wanted change to be made. In 1973, women are established the right to a legal and safe abortion via the well-known court case Roe v. Wade. The list goes on and on. Although we as a society have made huge leaps and bounds with women's rights, we still have a ways to go. Pay is still not equal among men and women. One popular culture example of this is the woman dollar. On average, women today make 86% of the money that men in the same position do. In an effort to acknowledge this and change it, people have looked into the past and at the work of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and other women's rights activists. Women struggle with inequality daily in the workplace, and many are simply harassed because of their sex. Elizabeth Cady Stanton stood up for women and created a strong foundation for feminism and women's rights. It is now our responsibility to continue her powerful legacy of positive change throughout the years to come. Elizabeth Cady Stanton's legacy and her goals will be made possible only when everyone does their best to treat both genders as equals.